Welcome everyone to the Adversity to Advantage podcast. I'm very excited today. We've got a real professional in the house, someone I respect and admire greatly. His name is William Pullen. He's a TedX speaker. He's a psychotherapist. He's also written an amazing book called Run for Your Life, which has informed some of his practice, which is around doing empathy runs. And we've had conversations around empathy and how it impacts our practice as therapists. Welcome to the show, William.
Thank you, Petra. Nice to be here.
Lovely to have you. So fill in a bit of the blanks from that. You've done so many things. Tell us a bit about what you do, who you help. What are you passionate about at the moment?
I think at the moment I'm excited particularly about empathy runs. I work as a regular therapist. I work as a running therapist. We can talk about that later if you're interested, or your listeners are interested. But empathy runs are a sort of thing that I've taken out of them. And they're just a very basic construct for two people to walk or run together for 10 minutes one side and 10 minutes on the other side. So one does the listening, one does the talking, and then you share. And it's this very simple platform, but what it does is it makes people, the movement and the camaraderie creates a sense of freeing up and revelation. And then, of course, 10 minutes of silence, somebody else listening to you for 10 minutes is unheard of these days. So that's another. Anyway, it really works. It's a fact. So I had a TEDx talk recently about that in Manchester, and that's my latest thing I'm passionate about, I would say.
So are you saying that kind of anyone can do these runs, or is it a therapist-client thing?
No. This is for anybody.
So anyone, just creating the environment where you've got some body movement and you're creating space to listen to sort of anything that the person wants to talk about?
Yeah, it doesn't need to be grave. It could be, what I had for dinner last night. It's nice to share even small things. They don't have to be massive, do they?
Well, and I find that it just, even if I do therapy in that way, maybe with a teenager or somebody who wants a bit of a change of scene, it takes away kind of the pressure of this, like, let me stare into your face situation and find out your problems.
Yeah, no, that's a massive point. There are so many different things, so many different levels that it works on. I think it's just a very simple, basic practice that really sort of captures our basic humanity, and that humanity is being kind of lost in the modern age with its, all the algorithms that have sent back that data to create social media that's so perfect at overwhelming you that we don't have space to hear ourselves or anybody else anymore. And that's the idea, of course. That's exactly, I'm not going to say they because there's no they. The they is the we. We're the users and we're the shareholders. But what this gives you is 10 minutes opportunity to talk. And what's, I think, miraculous about that, it's not miraculous, but it's important, is that because intimacy, sharing intimacy, framing conversations, daring to speak, etc., the less you use it, the less good you get at it. The more difficult it feels emotionally, but also the more difficult it is to construct a useful conversation. So I think often these days you need 5 minutes, of talking before you even work out what you're trying to say or how you're trying to say it. First, all this gobbledygook comes out, and then finally you get to the point. Now, of course, in the age that we're in, everybody's, their attention spans are half a second, and that's a long way off 5 minutes. So nobody's really heard anymore. Nobody's really understood. Nobody's got the time for it, But in this practice, I tell people it's very, very simple. For the person that's listening, you're not going to fix, you're not going to care for them, you're not going to reassure them, you're not going to ask them questions. Your job isn't to guide them. Your job is to do absolutely nothing but witness and hear them. That's it.
So it takes away some of the pressure. Yeah, completely takes away the pressure from the person listening and allows us to just experience being present with the other person.
Yeah.
Absolutely. This is so poignant for me, just because of experiencing some of that disconnect in the city and working for myself and the loneliness aspect and trying to forge like deep connections. So I went on quite an alternative festival over the weekend called the Togetherness Festival. No drugs or alcohol, not that anyone should have drugs, but none of that was present as a rule, but it was all about intimacy and human connection. And we did exercises and workshops where we listened to music and we walked around and we connected with a stranger and simply looked into their eyes for a minute or 2 minutes.
Wow.
Or yeah, I know. Or we look, and then the next phase was looking to their eyes and just touching palms. So you introduce touch as well as, eye contact. Absolute strangers. And I mean, the emotion and the connection that you would feel to a person after just that short exercise was just immense. And by sort of the second day, it would be before coffee that people would say, how are you? And you'd get the real, how are you answer and have such deep and meaningful connections that by the time I got back and yesterday, Monday, I was sort of on the tube, on the train, the contrast was so striking as far as no eye contact, everyone on their phones. And I was a bit like, what is going on in the world to disconnect us in such a big way when all we need is, those little things that can make it so great. So, as you know, the theme of this podcast is all around adversity and resilience. And I'm really curious just a little bit about your story and context of growing up. And do you think your parents and maybe the education system prepared you for life in the real world and what you would face?
Start off with a small question, why don't you?
Never.
My parents and the education system working together, and the church.
Of course.
And the Enlightenment. No, I think that we have to do one at a time. I think that parents pretty much always fail their children one way or another. Mine did an okay job. They did the best they could do with what they had. I don't think it was necessarily a fantastic job, but I'd give them a passing grade, They put us in situations, all of us children, into boarding schools and things like that at a very young age, 8 or 9 years old, and they lived abroad, and that has all sorts of effects on you. It has a long tail on you one way or another, and it's become an element of my work. And it speaks to my masculinity, it speaks to my security, it speaks to all sorts of things in my life. But for them, they didn't have much choice. They lived abroad in a country where the schools were absolutely no good. And you had to decide whether to, at a very early age, set your child on a track where they wouldn't necessarily, well, you know where I'm going with that.
Absolutely. Parents have that decision, and yet there's an impact on us as children as far as how it impacts us. And I guess I'm always curious about how two kids can have the same experience, perhaps of boarding school or of something else, and one of them is going to figure out how to bounce back and use that experience to allow them to deal with greater challenges, to be resilient, to develop that within them. And someone else might go on the path of addiction, of falling apart, of toxic relationships, and that sort of cycle. So I'm really curious about why that is, or what is it that people can do to build that resilience.
I was talking to one of my oldest friends, a woman called Jessica Alexander, who's just written a book called The Danish Way of Parenting. She was over here visiting me. We were talking about this. She's a mother of 2, and we were talking about why you can have in these families maybe 3, 4 kids, and one kid ends up writing a memoir talking about what a horror story it was, and the other 3 are like, I didn't see any of that. And we were discussing how that comes around, and I think part of it is that some parents make the mistake of thinking that it's fair and wise to treat all the children the same. And I think each child is an individual, and never more so than when you end up with a sensitive child, a child who's sensitive to stress of one sort or another, too much noise, too much change, too much whatever. And if you just try and sort of push her through with the rest, then that kid can feel that, find it quite traumatic, I think.
So do you think that resilience then is innate, that some kids are just born with more than others?
Yes, I do. I think you can develop it, absolutely. But I definitely think that some kids are born less resilient. Some kids are born more stressed, more prone to stress. Yeah. I mean, there are lots of studies showing that.
And I'm just curious as a therapist, because I've got my own story of what was it along your journey that informed your decision to be in that sort of helping role to support other people?
I think, like a lot of therapists, and I dare say probably like yours, I think the roots of it are found in the family. In my family, I was the eldest son, so that comes with a level of responsibility and problem solving and authority and care, responsibility, all that good stuff. So I think that's got the roots of it. And then you throw in the complexities of the family dynamic that may or may not push you into that role more strongly. And then you throw in a life story with twists and turns, and hey presto, if the right spell comes together, or the right trauma comes together, you end up in therapy, and you end up becoming a therapist. And I think that's probably 50% of us therapists or more. What would you say?
So you're saying that I love that statement, the right kind of trauma has pushed us into maybe some self-development journey ourselves, whether that's therapy or something else, and that can inform our decision to then sort of pay it forward or support other people in some way?
Oh, well, at that point we get into a really interesting conversation. But yeah, I like to think that it's...
What's true for you? Because the
What's,
conversation is wide, but what's true for you?
what's true for me is all my life I've tried to, in this, I described this sort of boarding school, young boarding school life. I found it difficult, and I decided that I would spend the time trying to understand the world. I spent a lot of time in the library. I spent a lot of time examining my own choices. I wanted to be an authentic person, and that's still in me today. And I guess for me, part of wanting to become a therapist was that I felt like I had gathered a lot of information about the world, one way or another. And then I had become a therapy client myself, so I'd been through that journey, and I realized that actually this was a skill set I probably possessed, and that it would be nice to use it and to explore it. And it was always my dream to write a book. I've always been interested in psychology and self-help, so it all came together quite neatly.
And I love the idea of the book titled Run for Your Life, because it can have so many different connotations.
Yeah.
What was it within your experience that specifically prompted the book? Yeah.
Okay, so cast your mind back to 11 years ago. In my life, I was 12 years ago, something like that. I was dating a woman from another country, another faith, another age, a lot of others. And I spent a lot of time over in that country. Israel is the country. And she was a very strong Israeli woman. And we had a fantastic time, but we were not able to reconcile our differences, and they were many. And as much as I wanted for us to be able to bridge the gap, we couldn't bridge it in the end. And I think some of your listeners may recognize this process whereby you give more and more of yourself away as you try to cross a bridge more and more into somebody else's world, so until you've got nothing left. At the very point that the relationship crashes, there's very little of you left. And so I had a real meltdown, and I think that in part it fed into a memory of abandonment as a child, and all sorts of a personal story as well. And I went into a depression. To answer your question, I took up running and psychotherapy, and what I noticed was that running, and I took up running with a friend of mine, a guy I used to play poker with. So neither of us were exactly healthy humans. And the two of us began by walking, then we started running 50 meters and 100 and so on. But bit by bit, we built it up, and what I noticed was the empowerment that I felt. It gave me a sense to get out. Prior to that, like a lot of depressed people, I'd made the mistake or maybe it's not a mistake, it's a sensible choice, and self-care at the time, perhaps, to isolate at home. And I knew that ultimately I needed to get out, get fresh air, and be with other people and make some changes. And so I found a lot of that in the simple practice of running. I felt like it was a place where I could be someone, do something, feel a sense of progress and a felt intervention. And then when I trained to become a therapist, I put the two together, and here I am.
How dark did it have to get to like force you to go outside? Because I know personally, exactly about 10, 11 years ago, what that dark isolation place is like. And it feels right at the time because whether it's a right self-care choice, maybe it is, but there's a fine line between that and the shame that we feel about people seeing us in that way. And then it extends and extends until we're just hiding. And so I'm wondering if there was a catalyst point for you, or was it just a slow shift where you just thought, I've got to go outside because this is untenable anymore? What was it for you?
Well, I think at first I was overwhelmed in my sadness for, I would say, several months. And once I dropped, and it was thanks to help from my doctor, actually, who put me on antidepressants. And that helped, reduce some of the noise in my head. And it put me in a place where I was more able to make choices and think straight. And then I recognized that only I could change what needed to be changed. And all I needed to do was find the right door, the right key out. I couldn't take any door. Many of them would be overwhelming in that state. But it needed to be something that was private enough, healthy enough, safe enough, all these things that you're looking for when you're in that state. And running, all I had to do was get from here to the park and be safe with a friend that I knew, share all my stuff with somebody I knew was sharing his with me equally. He was going through a divorce. And it felt safe, and I felt like I was healing.
So running was really the gateway into what I'm now hearing is around human connection, is around sharing your story, being there for someone else, building you up enough, building your resilience enough to lead you to the more productive side of training within your psychotherapy field?
Oh, absolutely. And as you all know, training to be a psychotherapist is one of the hardest things you can do in your life. It's a good 6-year journey or 7. You have to be in therapy yourself for the majority of it. And so it's a very long and tough journey. And I think the good news at the end of that is you don't just build up skills, but you build up, I think, the permission. You give yourself permission to look after other people because you know that you've put in the hours. You know that you managed to make it to the end. And that gives you just enough permission to say, yeah, you know what, well, I guess I have as much right as any other therapist or any other person training to be a therapist to practice.
Absolutely, and I think it's recognizing the theoretical journey that we go on, but essentially the personal development journey we go on to understand ourselves, to cultivate the empathy, because we see I certainly learned about, all the flaws within myself and all the things that I needed to work on and overcome and become resilient about, as coupled with the theory that allowed me just enough, as you say, permission to create space to connect with another human being. I do also feel that sometimes psychotherapy can feel a bit distant. So when people become quite stuck in the brain of it, the cerebral element, the theory of it, that unfortunately I've seen many therapists miss out, or I've heard feedback from clients that they feel like disconnected from the humanity and the empathy side of things. So I love that you're doing some of you're focusing on the empathy. I mean, what do you think about just the therapeutic industry? Do you think there is some disconnection, maybe mirroring what's going on in the world?
The therapeutic industry, do you think do I think therapists are struggling to connect as much as they once did? Yeah, sure. I don't think they're struggling, but I think that they're impacted too. We're all impacted by this world we live in, this double world that we live in, and they use social media, or we use social media, so we feel the impacts of that. Yeah, I would say so.
Absolutely. So tell me a bit about, you've worked with so many clients now, you've had the impact of the book, of your TEDx talk, and of your own personal journey. What do you think is essential in helping people build their resilience? So maybe as a child, we've got some innate qualities, higher or lower, but what are the things that we can actually do when life gets tricky or before it gets tricky to build up that resilience to be able to face it?
Well, I think discipline is a fantastic practice, or good habits, making your bed in the morning like that Admiral talked about. Building up little good habits, doing your ironing, making care to do the washing up, taking pride in the various little things that you do, I think can make you feel stronger. As the, I forget his name now, the Admiral with the famous YouTube, talking about if you start one each day by making your bed, anything else is possible. And I do think that's true. It's as he said, even if you do nothing else, you'll come back to a bed you made that looks great. And that's, and in there, what you've got is you've got a sense of pride in what you're doing. You've got confidence that you can look after yourself. You know that you've got good practice. So you've got a lot going on there just in making your bed. That'll create a fair amount of resilience. But mostly, I think what I always tell people is try to live. I don't think you can. I don't think there's a lot of resilience building opportunities sitting at home watching Netflix. I think you've got to challenge yourself, throw yourself into different things, whatever they're, relationships, personal, professional. Go and join a dance club. Try and climb Everest. Make flies at home. Fly fishing flies. Make beautiful flies. Write a book. Start a blog. Who knows? But just try lots of different things, and the more you try, the more you'll discover, as I put in my book, that you're not that man, that woman who only likes 8 out of the 100 ice creams out there, ice cream flavors. You're in fact somebody that likes 20, 30, 40 of them,
Yeah.
And you're much more than you think that you are.
Oh, I love that so much. Do you put habits and routines in place for you now, because as much as you know all this stuff and you've experienced loads of things,
Yeah.
you are also taking on lots of the world's problems, of people's issues, and we need to look after our well-being within that. Do you have habits and routines besides making your bed? I bet if we viewed into your room, your bed would be perfect. But that you incorporate into your own routines. Are you going to say this was the one day you didn't make your
ironing?
bed?
Do you know what? I love a bit of ironing. I put on a podcast, or I put on some classical music, or sometimes silence if it's first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
And I get that ironing out, and it gives me. I've got a lot of t-shirts. Generally during the day, I like to wear t-shirts.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's nice to wear t-shirts being ironed. That's nice, but what's even nicer is ironing it itself. It's such a Zen practice. You have to make the time for it. It doesn't even make sense, right? Because if you take them to the dry cleaners, you can have them done for next to nothing.
Yeah.
If you work out the value of your time. But I do it because I find it. I like the sense of self-care that it gives me. I know that I've taken time to be this person, to do this thing, and that I know that there's another person that just wants me to be, doing all these more useful things and, more professionally advancing things or fun things. And actually, I love the fact that I've worked out that this is actually what's really good for me. Cooking is another one. I like to cook.
So something around self-care, but there's a mindful element to that. The running as well, like being present fully without the distractions of the before and the after.
That's it. What do you do?
What do I do? I'm a work in progress, obviously. I like going to exercise classes that are high adrenaline. So occasionally yoga, but I prefer kickboxing or something because it allows me to release some of the adrenaline that builds up for me. I find meditation challenging because and we can go right back to survival as a kid, fight or flight, and I always do the fight element, and I push forward, and I mean that I've created it in a more healthy way where it's about achievement and pushing forward in life, but I definitely have to question my ability to stop and just be in the moment with my kids or do things that are not achievement focused.
Yeah.
And so this weekend that I was talking about, where I just left my phone in my car the entire time, was like a revelation at how addicted to my phone I actually am. I'd like to think I'm not, but it's work and I've got to, Oh my goodness. It's so soul draining, and then we become part of the problem of disconnection and avoiding eye contact and all the rest of it.
Yeah. No, it's atrocious. I think the more I read about people who take what was it I was reading? Call it a technological Shabbat. I'm not Jewish myself, but I think Shabbat's a Friday night thing. And I think the article, if I remember correctly, is about turning off your phone on Friday night for 24 hours. And I'm more and more attracted to the idea of that. I think that who was it, Marshall McLuhan, and all of his work. It's the medium, not the message. All of that stuff about how technology was going to do us in, and that was he wrote that 40 years ago or something. And he was writing about television. People were like, oh my God, we shouldn't be watching, these violent shows. And McLuhan, who was an expert on media, said, listen, you've got it all wrong. That's only part of it, what's on the TV. The real problem is going to be the TV itself, and the fact you're going to be addicted to it, and all these other media, and they're all going to make you. His theory was that they fragment you, because each kind of media essentially extends your nervous system, so that it no longer feels like it's just yours. Your ears are the ears that listen out for all these other things. Your fingers are the fingers of the internet. And so you become distended and spread out, and your sense of your own private space becomes smaller, and the sense that you are part of this bigger thing that becomes larger.
But then feeling disconnected. I mean, we definitely use all of those things as avoidance strategies. I mean, I've done it myself, and I definitely have clients coming to me where, I've had a bad day, I'll just watch Netflix for 6 hours, or I'll just chat or go on social, in order to avoid maybe feeling, and then you don't process some of the stuff, and it builds up over time, and then people have crash points where, 70% more children and young people are experiencing mental health issues. Which has to come from the lack of presence that they must feel in their lives.
And the wrong, as you were saying, it's the wrong kind of connection. We become connected to everything out there.
Yes.
But then I remember about 3 years ago, I was at a party and I found myself dancing, which I hadn't done for some time. I'm not quite as old as that makes me sound. Pretty old. Anyway, for whatever reason, I hadn't danced for some time, and it left me happy for days and days afterwards. Because I felt connected to my body, to these people at the party, to the fun, to joy, to community, and the reality is that it doesn't matter who I speak to on the net and what interesting friendships I make. If they're not here now, if we're not breaking bread together in person, then as soon as I hang up, the disconnect between where I was and where I am becomes so self-evident again. So, of course, what we choose to do is just immediately facing that disconnect, just try to quickly reconnect with what's available, which is, of course, go back on the web until finally we're overinvested there.
What the hell do we do? What do we do about this?
Just turn off some of the notifications on your phone, and put your phone down, go for walks without it, just switch the phone off, switch the bloody thing off.
So consciously decide to have breaks. And I also think we need to make choices to be the change, not wait for society to change, but to make the eye contact, or to have the conversation, or to connect with real people, or make that sort of effort. I also, in order to keep my resilience sort of sustained, do some of that morning routine stuff that people talk about. So you're talking about doing the bed, just trying to consciously fill my brain up with things that are more uplifting and useful, don't listen to the news, because there's so much noise. If we're talking about technology, there's so much noise at us from all angles all the time, that I find that because I deal with a lot of problems and issues in the world, I've got to choose like how much noise comes into my brain. And so and it's been amazing to not watch the news or to switch off. And I don't read that bloody Metro paper in London on the tube, just because it's always just horrific, like pedophiles and rape and war. And it's like, that's the only thing in it. And it, affects my mood and my resilience in a big way. But I encourage people to like experiment. Find the thing that's right for you. You tried the running thing. There's some universal truths around going outside and making your bed and doing so, looking at respecting yourself in a way. But there's other stuff that it's like, does meditation work for you? Does yoga work for you? Like what works for you, and trying it out.
Yeah, I read an interesting study last week on the contrast between reading non-fiction and fiction. And I suspect you're like me and you read far too much non-fiction. Yes. And I find that non-fiction just feeds into that part of me that wants to know, needs to know, and thinks that knowing will make me stronger, thinks that knowing will get me somewhere, when actually what I need in this disconnected world is I need to feel, and I need to be felt, so to speak. And so the article says that you should read more fiction than non-fiction, because fiction helps you to empathize not just with others but with yourself too. The complexity, the emotional complexity of fiction is much better for the heart and soul than non-fiction.
So are you saying that empathy also can be nurtured and taught in the same way as resilience can?
Yes, absolutely.
It's a tricky one. But I love what you say about feeling and being felt. That's often the missing piece of the puzzle. We can know things and learn and be absorbed with knowledge from all and every single angle. But what about the human connection bit where we actually feel something? Ooh, I love that.
Well, the problem is neglect, right? When something's missing, you don't know. You forget that you even had it, or maybe you never had it. But what you're left with is a feeling that something's not quite right. And you've no idea what it is, because the thing that's not quite right is missing. If somebody's beating me up every morning, then I know that that's what the problem is. But if I get up and my life feels cold and meaningless, and yet I apparently live a life much like my neighbors, then how can I work out what's missing? And actually what's missing, I love the work of Martin Buber, who talks in his famous treatise, I Thou, about the contrast between the I-thou relationship, the I-it relationship. In the I-it relationship, I objectify the other. The man that sells me the newspaper is just a person selling me a newspaper. I'm not interested in seeing him properly, talking to him properly. I'm not interested in him knowing anything about me. So I'm not interested in any connection. Buber said that when I make the effort to have an I-thou relationship, including with the newspaper guy, when I look at him in a way that he knows that I see him, and so he feels looked at by me, and then I see him recognizing that he can see that I'm looking at him. When my words show that I'm interested in him, when my smile shows that I'm interested in him, when my body movement seems to suggest that in this moment I am here present buying this newspaper, I didn't try to sort of buy it while on the run. For this 3 seconds, I'm actually standing here right in front of you, and your presence is important to me, even if it's only for 3 seconds. He said that in the I-thou relationship, when two people come together like that, the world makes sense. He said that the critical thing, and I love this idea, the critical thing is that you have to share the stage 50-50. Don't go in there and try to be Mr. Charming. Don't, and dominate the stage, because the newspaper guy doesn't want that every morning. He just wants you to be normal and show up and see him. And the two of you, it's the same in a relationship, right? You have to share the stage, which means my ideas about the world are no more important than your ideas are. And I love that idea. And I think when we do that, when we take an interest in others and we dare us to reveal ourselves, then what else is there?
Absolutely. Oh, and yeah, the whole thing about you don't notice what's absent, you just feel the void of something. And
Oh,
people
yeah.
come to us with symptoms of anxiety or depression
Yeah.
or all sorts of things. And I think that's really what it can often be, is a lack of fulfillment and a lack of human connection. So, yeah.
So much. I was just going to say so much. I think so much anxiety, modern day anxiety, is built exactly around that. Is people are they're neglecting each other and they're neglecting themselves. And the consequence of that is a quite correct sense of anxiety. The anxiety is there to let you know, guess what, you're messing up. You need to change something.
Absolutely. So, in summary, what I'm getting from this is listen to, what your body is telling you as far as when you're experiencing some of that anxiety or depression or loneliness or the absence of something, make the effort, listen to it and figure it out with a therapist or a friend with empathy. What are the ways that you can improve on that experience?
Yeah.
What's next for William Pullen? Where are you pushing forward to in the future?
Well, I'm just about to submit a proposal for my next book, which the working title at the moment is The Final 5% Making Peace with the Tough Stuff. It's about how we tend to work on all the easiest parts of ourselves first, and then there's a sort of no-go area just here where we keep things like shame and regret and guilt and things like that.
Yeah.
And so it's how to have a better relationship with that little piece there and repatriate it.
Amazing. I can't wait. When are you hoping for it to come out?
Well, it depends whether it's going to go to the Frankfurt Book Fair in October, and we'll see whether anybody bids for it.
Amazing. Exciting. And if people want to work for you or find your book or get in touch anymore, where can they find you?
They can find me on Twitter at Pullen Therapy. They can find me on Facebook, dynamicrunningstherapy.com. They can find me my personal website, dynamicrunningtherapy.com. They can find my TEDx on YouTube, of course. Just put William Pullen, Movement is Medicine. That's it.
That's a whole lot. Perfect. Well, we'll add all of those links into the show notes so that our listeners can access those as easily as possible. Until then, thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, and your authenticity. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Petra. I enjoyed it.